So Hillary ran it off. She's not always person. We find this tons of stuff in the background. And then we have Anna in the back. And then Karen as well.
Cleaning up right now.
She's cleaning up, so she can't be in here. And then Charlie in here. There it is. Yeah. And Charlie, we run around and try to get them to make sure that we keep things in the balance. Yeah. So thank you, Charlie. So I don't want to take much time because neither of these gentlemen is known for being for their brevity. No, but we need to say a little bit about Hank first. Hank, I got here in 2009. Hank's been here for many years. Really amazing comparative physiologist. One of the reasons I came here. As you may know, he's worked on animals all over the world, including bears here, bears, polar bears, Komodo dragons, the list goes on and on and on. He's done all kinds of really fundamentally important work. That's one that we were, and then for 23 years, 20. I was thinking it's a little.
19.
I think it's 22. So on average, we're 20. 20 years directing this place, and really is responsible for this series, the created lecture series, right? Bringing the public, bringing everybody into this space to learn about all these things. Maybe much of it because we facilitate super exciting to have Hank here. And then after Hank retired, Berol jumped up and stepped into the position for a number of years and really built off of what Hank had done and really got lots and lots of people here. As many of you know, is a fantastic storyteller and a charming individual. He got tons of people up here to get engaged in this place. And I'll just say that the university, because of his effort and Hank's laying the groundwork, is now investing a lot of resources into making it a real amazing facility. So our long-term vision is really world-class. This place being known for being the place for you. So that's all I'm going to say. I'm going to give a little time to Hank, but let's welcome Hank first.
Michael, this podium, I really get teary when I just get behind this podium. I think I've introduced almost 200 speakers over the time I was here. And it was just a pleasure to be in this room, pleasure to interact with the audience. And to tell you what, the Jackson audience is one of the most astute audiences I've ever dealt with. You go to a national meeting, I didn't get a question from you guys, TV, so be good to me. I really think that's cool, introducing everybody. It makes me so bad. Rich Viola, I don't think I ever introduced you. So where's Rich? Rich is my caretaker. He and I worked together for years and years. It's really nice. I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to kind of divide my talk up into 3 areas. And I'm going to start it off with just talking about the history of science in our national park. Not just this national park, all national parks. So to understand it, it's almost like a lecture. It's to see how did we get science into this park and all parks. And then what was the history of our research station back in the 1940s and 50s. And then how it kind of evolved into UW-NPS we have here at the AMK Ranch. So with that, Larry, we're not advancing here. Right there. Oh, cool. Hey, we're starting in 1916. This was the Organic Act, and what it did is it established our National Park Service. And when it did that, it had a mandate to leave the parks in an undisturbed state. You know, that's a real hard order to do. But it's allowed for 100 years, for a century, to have our national parks and to have it like a living laboratory. You can learn from it, you know, what a relatively undisturbed habitat is like, understand the ecosystem, and do data analysis, data collection, and have data-driven management decisions. So, think about this, that research in the park, it's not just been a smooth ride. It's had ups and downs. There have been times where it was kind of supported. There was times it was, you know, just kind of neglected. There was times when science really was kind of at odds with resource. And there were times that you were managing the national parks just for scenic vistas and not really for ecosystem processes. But there were two people and two documents that really got science going in the park. That was this man right here, George Wright, and A. Starker Leopold. Now, George, 1928, he was really active in the park. But he started off, you know, as a student at UC Berkeley. He got a wildlife degree. He was kind of ambitious. He was smart. He had a lot of insight. And so as soon as he got into the park, boom, man, he started just going up the hierarchy. And right there in 1928, he established the first wildlife biology program within the national park. And then in 33, he became the chief of the wildlife division. And then FDR kind of recruited him into being on the chair for the National Resource Panel. And what he was supposed to do is to do a survey of all of our parks, see where the parks did, see what had to be done to really maintain their integrity. And so what he did is he came up with this report. Now, my wife said, "You're not going to have a picture of a document." I said, "Yeah, but this is not just a document. This is fauna 1. It was followed by fauna 2. Honestly, I fall in love with this document. I mean, if I could just touch this, I mean, it's like, it is indeed the Bible for the wildlife biologist. And what it did in there is make this assessment of our parks. It said that, you know, parks are, it's their duty. No, you preserve the habitat. You also will recruit science. You have science that can have ecosystem integrity. And so he did it. He introduced science to our national parks. And in about 1935, he was coming back from Washington, D.C., and he was traveling with the park superintendent of Yellowstone. He kind of dipped down in Big Bend, and they were heading back north up to Yellowstone. Cars coming the other way, has a flat tire, blows out, comes in his lane, bang, a man hits him, and both of these men die. And George Wright was 31 years old. 31 years old, young man, died young in a short period in that national park. What an impact, man. He brought science to the park. So what we do is we celebrate him right now with the George Wright Society. And what that does is celebrates and it helps fund wildlife programs in our national parks and our wildlands at large. But then we had 3 years. George was a real strong advocate of science. And for 30 years, man, it just kind of disappeared. It wasn't a strong man at the helm. So it went back to the old traditional ways of managing our lands. And that was kind of like the seat of your pants. You know, predator preys, you know, and basic species. It was just, hey, do something. But it wasn't data driven. And then, you know, there's still some biologists on board. And you still look at fauna 1 as that Bible. And then this guy picked it up. This is A. Starker Leopold. And Starker was the son of Aldo Leopold. Of course, Aldo Leopold, there's a lot about him. You know, he's a naturalist, he's a fire ecologist. But his son, A. Starker, he was a real academic. He was a full professor at UC Berkeley. He published about 100 scientific papers, 5 books, and he was a National Academy of Science award. And then Kennedy, in 1960, assigned him as chief scientist on an advisory committee. And once again, it was to assess those parks, see where they're going, what can we do to maintain science and science decision making. So in 1963, he presented this document, his wildlife management in our national parks, to Stuart Udall, who was the Secretary of the Interior. And this became known as, and it's a capital T, the Leopold Report. And this is another document. If I could just put my hands close to it, fauna 1, fauna 2 in the Leopold report. Because what he did here is he said that, our national parks, and he called them vignettes. And he said, you should never use that word vignettes, islands. Our national parks are islands of primitive America. And the only way you can preserve that is to have a full staff of wildlife biologists. And you have to kind of change that culture in the National Park Service. And you have to have science. You have to have science full at the table making decisions. But once again, we had this real reluctance, to kind of give up that tradition. And the National Park Service director at the time made this comment. Okay, science is good. Science is out there. Collect data, you analyze that data, you make recommendations, you don't make decisions. You're there as an advisory, you're not there as a decision maker. And this really upset Leopold. And he also realized when you're looking at our national parks and you're doing ecosystem management, it's tough. It's really a complex thing to do. So out of frustration, in 1968, Leopold just resigned as the chief scientist on the advisory board. And once again, just like after Fauna 1 and George Wright, there was this kind of gap in science. And this was Cliff Hampton. He was our governor of Wyoming and then became senator of Wyoming. And he was kind of real concerned about this because our parks were really having some problems. So he proposed this was the National National Science Research Act. And that was to make a separate section, a separate entity in the Park Service that was only research. It was a conservative Congress, didn't go anywhere, it wasn't ratified, and it just died on the field. But the park started to become aware there were some real problems. So they published their own report. This is the Park State of the Park report. And they found that in their national parks, 75% of these had threats that couldn't document. And threatens to the scenic resources, air quality, plants and animals. And a lot of threats that were due to outside the park. We're talking about mining, we're talking about timber, we're talking about cattle. So we know that those threats are there. It took another decade to get this. This is the National Academy of Science NRC report. That's the National Research Report, importance of research in our national parks. And what that did is that just kind of mandated. Says national parks must be able to determine how to detect change. They have to be able to understand ecosystem dynamics and to devise management responses. And indeed, there's a need for science and a need for science to have a full voice at the table. So it took another 10 years to get to this document, National Park Service Omnibus Act, Section 202, where finally it says this. It says, provides clear authority and direction for the conduct of scientific studies. And that's cool. Science is now fully at the helm. They're making decisions. They're just not advising. Okay, I had to have one graph. And this is kind of a little bit of an embarrassment. You look at my my y-axis, hey, there's no unit on that. You look at my x-axis, those years are kind of funky. But what this is showing you is that research, science, database decision making was not just overnight. I mean, you had blips. You had the fauna report, fauna 1 and 2, and the Leopold report, all these NRC reports. And so finally, they're at the table. And then, man, what happens here? This is a National Biological Survey. This was in response to the Endangered Species Act, and it was the Clinton administration. And Bruce Babbitt thought, man, we've got to get our act together. We have spotted owls, we have black-footed ferrets, we've got a bag of worms. Let's pull all of our science together and we can really have impact. So they pull science out of the national park, BLM, Fish and Wildlife Service, and they pull their money. But it lasted for 3 years and it failed. Great experiment with that. Cliff Hampton, he proposes just like an order of magnitude greater. Good in theory, but it failed. And when it failed, this happened. They didn't get it back. National Park Service, they lost 164 full staff biologists. They lost $20 million. So now they don't have a science staff. And this is where I'm going with this little video, is that now it's external science. This is where we get to be important. You have colleges and universities, you had to have NGOs, you had to have all these science people out there. They're working with the national park. They have issues, you have a small staff, so you're working in concert with that staff to address these problems. And then we go to 2014. And then This one only calls for external science. It calls for research stations, and the value of research stations be like a platform within a national park, bringing people in, give them something, some support, and that's what we do. As a matter of fact, we were the first research station within the boundaries of a national park. So if you look at this was 1945. This is the Jackson Hole Wildlife Park and Preserve, and it was associated with the New York Zoological Society. And then right there in that little circle, up here at the top, this is Highway 287, and over here at the junction that goes over to the lake to the left. This is the oxbow right over here. This is little circuitous twisting stuff, but that was the park headquarters, and it was kind of cool. I worked there with Colin. We did work on beavers in the Snake River. But all the buildings were on the historic register, and some of those buildings, came from the town of Moran. And Moran used to be right there on the dam, and he moved it to its present location. Well, we inherited a lot of those buildings. So here's something else right there. That's 400 acres of captive critters. They had bison in captivity, and this was supported. Because it looks at wildlife and the viewing. If you're driving on 287, before you get to the oxbow, there's a turnout. If you stop at that turnout and you look at that big old meadow, that's what you're looking at. And there were actually bleachers. So there were not only elk and bison, but there were pronghorn, there were deer, and there was even a badger. So it was kind of like a zoo. So these folks, Lauren Forrest Albright from the National Park Service, and Fairfield Osborne, who was with the New York Zoological Society, they thought this was a good deal, having this wildlife park and exposing wildlife, to visitors. But this couple right here, this is Olaf and Marty Murray, long-time family, in Jackson Hole, and they absolutely disagreed with this. Why do you have captive animals in a national park? People are getting lazy. They're sitting in bleachers and they're looking at captive animals. Used to be on those backcountry roads, and seeing things for themselves. So they fought and they fought and they fought. And finally, in 1954, boom, the wildlife park is gone. Fences are down, elk are out there with a herd of 15 bison. That's the genetic stock for the bison we have right now. And this was renamed, it became the Jackson Hole Biological Research Station. Kind of a cool place, had a lab. The first director was L. Floyd Clark. He was from the Department of Zoology, Physiology, University of Wyoming. And there were some really interesting people that worked there. Frank and John Craighead. They were ornithologists, they were falconers, and boom, man, they really got into grizzly bear management. And so some of the park people didn't agree with their philosophies, but they had an incredible impact in this environment. Howard Beale, he was a botanist. He looked at aspen and fire. He thought fire controlled aspen populations. And Margaret Altman, she was one of the first wildlife biologists. She would side channel into the elk herds, and she thought it was elk that were controlling vegetation. And so there was some debate going back and forth between these two. Then in 1976, this is when Ken Diem came aboard as our director, and the Jackson Hole Biological Research Station coupled up with the Northern Rocky Mountain Cooperative Study Unit, and we became UW-NPS, University of Wyoming National Park Service Research Station here at the AMK Ranch. You made that big old move. You go forward to that site where that old station was, you can't find a thing. You can't find a little piece of charcoal, you can't find a nail, but it was there. So what we have now is we're here at the AMK Ranch, and our primary mission is of George Wright and East Arthur Leopold to provide research support, just like Michael said, to the national parks and the national forest in the greater Yellowstone area. And we do that in a lot of different ways. You guys know we have housing. We have housing for about 60 people, and it's kind of rustic, but it's still it's comfortable. Has a lot of cool ambiance. We had some pretty high-profile folks here in the last few days, and they dealt with it, and they felt like they were in a rustic environment. So Michael's going to talk a little bit about the future we're going to have in terms of housing and how we deal with it. with a higher profile number of people that could be using the station. We have laboratories, an aquatic lab that's down at the boat dock. We had a terrestrial lab that you're familiar with. Back in that back room, I remember going back there, and that's when I immediately thought, I've got to rewire this place. I mean, the amperage pool was incredible. You had water baths, you had centrifuges, you had gas chromatographs. Everything was going, man. It was just really, really productive. So, might be looking at a new laboratory facility coming down. So we have boats, we have canoes, we have traps, we have things that, people can either just take or rent and get out and do their work in the environment. We have a branch UW library, we have internet. When I would be in here, I'd be just getting on people. You can't stream those movies, man. You're eating up my bandwidth. And now we've got fiber optic, and man, it's really, really fast. And just don't take that for granted. I mean, this is a research station. It's pretty cool. We have both arts and science. So we have music and music festivals here. We have art classes. If you notice right down here in this lower picture, when that art class is just getting ready to leave, we have a show in here. So we have these students, they can put their material out. We have wine and crackers and cheese. For some of these students, it's the first time they've ever had a show. The first time they ever had somebody buy their work. So it's just been really a great experience for them. We have field courses for education, geology, ecology. I taught an ecology course, ecology in the Yellowstone with Scott Seville. I still get people contacting me saying, man, that was the best course I ever had in my life. How could you miss when you're doing the ecology of the Yellowstone? And we have conferences and we have workshops. Just finished the conference that was in here. Very often, they're catered by Jackson Lake Lodge, and it's a pretty good venue. And we have this weekly seminar series. And the reason that I think that it's here is to allow someone with credentials, in the social, biological, and physical sciences, get up and talk about their work. And for you to learn that, man, this is where my tax dollars are going, so know what they're doing and how that money is being spent. Now, every year we get a notice like this. It's from the Park Service. And in this, they have a series of priorities. These are things that they are dealing with. These are problems. They have to have them resolved. And so there'll be things that were in the cultural sciences and seeing things in the social science. And something's over here in the hydrology and maybe on soils and GIS. And then down here in wildlife biology. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just kind of do like a photo safari. I take a little photo tour because I want to kind of give an idea of what the diversity of projects are. Michael alluded to that. But we have so many fun, neat things, and it's hard to just pick out half a dozen or so to give you that story of breadth and diversity. So I'm going to give it a shot. So in the area of cultural science, we do a lot of work and supported a lot of classes on restoration of historic structures. We had one on the effect of dude ranches. And you may, God, you're supporting some of that dude ranches. What's all that about? But it's really cool. This was Amanda Reese. She found, in the late 80s and early 1990s, you had these dudes come in from the east, and they learn how to wrangle, they learn how to, ride a horse. Not one way. They also brought ideas, ideas of conservation, ideas of hunter ethics. And so it was an exchange of ideas back and forth. So it was really a cultural thing. Dude races played a real role here in the valley. Social sciences, be bear aware. So we evaluated that program. How does it work? Are people getting the message? Do we have to kind of tweak it? And man, I'll tell you, it has been incredibly successful. Do a lot of work on physical science. This is a reservoir out here. We have a dam. So we have irregular water flow. And what does it do in terms of the sedimentation? What's it do in terms of fisheries and the aquatic mammals, the otters and the beavers? And we look at geology. If you look out this window and you look back over here, we're looking at Moose Canyon. That's some of the oldest rocks in the world. That's 3.8 billion years old. And you look across Moran, there's a Teton fault right there. So we looked at earthquake hazards, and some of that work, we have that dam kind of solidified so that it can stand an earthquake. We also do basic research. With Carl Sagan, he had this little comment. He said, when you stop doing basic research is when you start eating your seed corn. So we have studies like this. This is sage crickets. They're an ancient orthoptery. And these guys, the male's just sing, female comes in, female, wow, man, shoots off with the elytra, sucks out its hemolymph, and then they breathe. So this is female choice. And what a nuptial gift to have that chance. And then this is a study. This is one that George Montopoli visits here tonight. You look at fire and you look at timber, and timber can sequester a lot of mercury. The methylated state, it burns with forest fire, goes up in the air, gets into the aquifer fish, and gets up in the higher trophic level. So we do a lot on inventory, and I recognize this name up here. This is Marianne Harlow. She worked with Larry Schmidt. And what they did is they digitized about 6,000 plants, vascular plants. And so now you don't have to go to the herbarium, don't have to make an appointment to get in there. You get online and, there it is. All that data is right there. Lasha Tronstead, she loves these invertebrates. She can just find these things anywhere. But, she shows this is the health and vigor of this stream. This is the food that's available, not only for fish, but for other animals. And we do a lot of ecosystem processes and a lot that's just kind of dealing with global climate change. And I don't want to embarrass Michael, but one of his many, many studies is looking at bumblebees. And with climate change, are the bumblebees, working up in higher altitudes? He's had students looking at in terms of the biodiversity and also, the energetics of flying in thin air. And you talk about those pikas. George and I talk about this a lot. These guys are really thermally challenged. They just can't deal with the heat. So they're moving up that altitudinal gradient. And how far can they go up that talus slope before they just kind of ledge out? If you get up those lakes and you look at sedimentation, man, it tells you a lot. Look at the diatoms, you look at the layers of ash, you can tell what the temperature has been. You can tell what the forest fire history has been. Talking of forest fires, you need these serotinous cones in lodgepole pines, but now we're finding that some of the temperatures are getting so hot just on the ground that these serotinous cones are prematurely just firing. Out here in this lake, how do you know when you catch a rainbow or a cutthroat trout, where it came from? What canyon out there? Each one of these canyons has a different salinity and I'm forgetting it's a stable isotope. So it has a stable isotope signature that's specific for each one of those canyons. And it gets to these little structures right here are called otoliths, used for balance. But with that otolith, and it's strontium, I knew they would come up. So you look at the strontium signature of this rainbow trout, it came from over here, Berry Creek. Then you look at Owl Canyon right here, that fish came from Owl Canyon because of that strontium signature. And this is because of that right there in that little otolith. We do research that's directly related to management. You have disease, brucellosis. You have an infected placenta or a little fetus. How long does it stay on the ground? 24, 48 hours. Not long, it's scavenged away. Antivirus, we're running about maybe 4%. So we're a healthy environment. Predation, by grizzly bears. And you get those wolves coming in. What's it doing in terms of displacing the coyotes and the small mammal biodiversity? Then you have a lot to deal with invasive species. This is the New Zealand mud snail. And these guys are really, really back here in the thousands, hundreds of thousands in Polecat Creek. It's warm water. We're really concerned that all those little guys, which can't really be digested by fish, so they're out competing the native snails. So if the water's starting to warm, they're going to move and get into Jackson Lake. We have the small grants program. What we do is we give out, this is the UW-NPS in concert with the park, just a small grant, 25,000, maybe up to 5. We give these out every year. It's a competitive grant. What we're designed to do is to give a project a little leg up, get it started, and then they can kind of parlay this into greater. So just 3 examples. This is one from Monica Turner. We gave about to $150,000, but man, we returned over $2.5 million worth of research to the greater Yellowstone area. And then Chuck Peterson's with us here in the audience. Chuck works on biodiversity of amphibians. He looks at, how are different species of frogs and salamander surviving in this environment, and what's going on with creek-dipping fungus. $20,000, boy, $500,000 that he generated to get back into the research in our environment. Diane Dubinsky, she works on birds and butterflies. She's finding that butterflies, man, the males and females are arriving at different times. So they're not really breeding well because of the phenology in climate change. $16,000, almost $1 million in return. All this goes into our annual report. It was a hard copy report, but now it's all online. You get to our website, boom, boom, you put in the name, Harlow beavers, so you get to all those things that we did on beavers, or you do emus, and you get Montopouli's work. You just put in names or the topic. So in my time here, from 1976 to when I retired, we had over 600 research projects that were jointly funded by us and the national park. And that came out to about $3.5 million. We have a program, it's an internship program, where we have 2 interns, we give them a stipend and a place to live. So what they do, they get in the park, they work in the park, they get to know the park. And if you want to be able to, what they want to make is a career choice. So it's been a real good way of recruiting people to become, park employees. We've had over 70 colleges and universities and over 1,000 scientific peer-reviewed publications. Susan Murphy was the Chief Science and Resource Officer here in Grand Teton National Park. And she made this comment. She said, UW-NPS equals 95% of the research for the 2 parks is our research program. So that's what I was trying to just get across. Research in the park started off having their own biologists, their own staff, taken away. So now we augment that. And right now, we're 95% of the research program in Grand Teton National Park and in Yellowstone. So that's my little story on history. And sitting there in my director's cabin, I think one of the most rewarding times of my life in that 20 years was to be on that little picnic table on that porch. And everybody's coming back out of the field. And everybody's kind of a little noisy, they're unloading stuff, they're tired, but they're laughing. Everybody's laughing, everybody's getting along. And everybody is enjoying doing field research or enjoying interacting with each other. And I'm enjoying just sitting there and listening to them being good scientists and good stewards of our environment. Those are precious moments and precious years. So I really miss this place. Thank you.
And I'll just say, I didn't know anything about Harold. If you don't know, Harold is the giant in ecotoxicology. So he built this facility south of the university called Red Buttes, where much really important toxicology was done and how contaminants and environment affect issue. The Society for Environmental CTEX, Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry, essentially Harold founded, and it's the society for the business. So aside from his administrative, and then also he started the Hobbs School at the University of Wyoming, which is a really, really critical part of what we do. So he's done all kinds of other stuff other than just being director here. So Harold.
Thank you, Michael. So, Hank is giving you a deep background. Now I'm just going to give you a few summary snippets to kind of help us understand overall what's been going on lately. And I'm going to talk about activities and events as an example of 1 year's work, and Hank has surveyed a lot of that, but I'm going to give you a summary of what happens in 1 year. Then I'm going to talk about special events as well, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about cooperative agreements with the Park Service between the University of Wyoming and Grand Teton National Park, and why that's important and what's going on, what's been going on since we started in 1954 to now, and why those cooperative agreements have helped solidify and build on the marriage that we have between the university and Grand Teton National Park. So in about 2013, maybe 2012, Hank started telling me when we were at the bar, I'm gonna retire at the end of the year, or I'm gonna retire next year. And Hank had been the director of the research station for 20 years. At the time, I was the head of the Zoology and Physiology department, and I had had enough of dealing with departmental and campus politics. And I remember what the view was like at the research station from the director's cabin, and I thought, I'd rather have Hank's job than the one I got. So I applied. Well, I arm twisted to administrators and they gave it to me. Let's see, button push bottom right. Oh. This one? So this is, I mean, Hank gave you examples of the kinds of research that were being done and other activities. This is a typical year at the UW-NPS research station, this place. In a typical year, there were 10 classes and field research courses, 10 classes on different topics in field ecology, geology, astronomy, and even photography and art. From 9 US colleges and universities, they come from all over the country to participate in a field course taught by somebody from Yale or somebody from St. Louis High School. So a lot of field classes and field research courses. Workshops and meetings like Michael Dillon and his colleagues just finished yesterday with campus leaders from it's Cardiff University in the Wales and the University of Wyoming. That's going to lead to probably partnerships and projects between these two distant universities. A very important meeting. In 2016, we had 17 workshops and meetings about invasive species, bear mobilization, air quality, climate modeling, water quality, and even biomedical research. We also had in the same year 27 different research projects and teams with 2 to 15 people in a team, all housed here and going out and doing their work and their research mostly during the day on diverse topics, as Hank showed you, from ecology, geology, to water quality, fisheries biology, wildlife biology, and social and cultural and historic things as well. So 27 teams and projects with, we calculated how many user days that was. I won't bore you with the number, but it's big. Harlow seminars. Now, Harlow started 25 years ago or so, and it got bigger, bigger, and bigger, and so big that when he retired, the University of Wyoming made the decision, we're going to name those seminars after him as his certified sort of status in the university. So this today and for the last, since he retired, has been a Harlow seminar series. Now, I'm getting ahead of myself here. We also, I mean, one really notable thing is these seminars in 2016 drew on average week to week over 100 members of the general public every week with the barbecue and stuff. So that's on average 100 people every week. It's a pretty important connection to the Jackson whole Greater Yellowstone ecosystem kind of outreach and education to the general public. So very important. We also had special events in 2016. The very first Wyoming Festival, New Music in the Mountains. Some of you might have heard the Wyoming Festival 4th edition just last week, was it? Okay, where competitive in a competition. Young composers are selected to compose new music. Annie Guzzo, who's been a friend of the station for many years, enticed the Grand Teton Music Festival musicians to participate and perform these new compositions here and at the Visitor Center down in Moran. We also have a spider conference, interconnectedness, internalization, and stewardship. 10 ecologists and artists working together on spiders of Wyoming. So it can seem esoteric, but it was fun. And here was a really special event that happened in this room in the Berol Center in 1989. In 1989, the Cold War had been going on between the United States and the Soviet Union for 40 plus years. But Gorbachev became a leader of the Soviet Union. And you remember, they were striking on the blocks. Openness and freedom in the Soviet Union in late 1980s. And under President Reagan and Bush, the US and the Soviets started some discussions. Those discussions were led often by James Baker, the US Secretary of State, and Edward Shevardnadze from the Soviet Union. And you may not know this, but James Baker had a ranch here in Wyoming. So he knew about Wyoming and he knew about Jackson. And he knew about that view out the window. So he invited Shevardnadze and the Soviet Union staff and the State Department to come to Jackson. Their delegations stayed at the Jackson Lake Lodge because there was a bunch of them. But when they needed one-on-one conversation between Baker and Shevardnadze, they met in this room, the two of them. Now, in order for that to happen, all the researchers were evicted. They were told to go home or go out tent in a campground for a few days while this was going on. And there were Secret Service people all over the place. But Baker and Shevardnadze had these one-on-one meetings at the Berol Lodge in this room. And at the conclusion, Baker said, "We made progress, and I'd like to think that the Tetons towering nearby, Jackson Lake before us, and the rustic openness of the Berol Lodge facilitated much." You may not remember, dig back. This is September 1989. Within months, Poland pulled out of the Soviet Union. And within months, the Berlin Wall fell. The Cold War maybe didn't completely end, but it was really reduced, in part because of Baker and Shevardnadze and their discussions in this room. So we really respect and appreciate that. Okay, this is kind of administrative BS, but how do we get this done? The University of Wyoming and National Park Service, Grand Teton, have had cooperative agreements. I mean, we are on Park Service land. These buildings are Park Service property. They invited the university to move their research station from Moran to this AMK ranch, which the Park Service purchased from the Barrows, or from the Barrows. And they invited the university to move the research station. Now, we've had cooperative agreements guiding us from 1 year renewable to 3, 5, 10, or 20 years. The current agreement with the Park Service and the universities for 20 years. I'll tell you why in a moment. Why was it only for 1 year sometimes? Well, you have different personalities. Different personalities being director of the station, different personalities being superintendent of the park. And sometimes they clashed. And when that happened, especially in the late 70s, I think it was, there was a fracas between the university and the park. And so they were 1-year renewal. And we were worried, it's like to go to Montana State or Yale, who knows? And we wanted to keep it. So we wanted to keep the partnership going. So Hank was brought in and made a better arrangement and got along better with the park and the park superintendent. So then things went on in the mission. So all of that, 1 year or 20 years, is to provide opportunities for both management and basic research, social, cultural, physical, and biological sciences, and really also in ecosystem, especially Grand Teton and the Rockefeller Memorial Park. And it covers a lot. These cooperative agreements can be 50, 60 pages. Lawyers get involved, so they get kind of long sometimes. But some of the most important things are just joint funding in the small grants program that Hank talked about, joint funding in housing for 2 interns to work with Park Service personnel, provide overnight lodging for researchers at reasonable rates. In this area, staying here is about as cheap as you can get. Provide annual report with research project summaries in this. These are all online, all the way back to what year, Connie? The beginning, 1954. So they're all online at UW-NPS website. You can read a report from 1907. So maintenance and stewardship of the NK Ranch and other NPS assets. That's been difficult. These are old facilities. The Berol Lodge, this building was built in 1937. The Johnson Lodge down the hill was built in 1926, I think. And the infrastructure is that old. So the plumbing, the water treatment, the septic tank and leach field, there were seven of them serving different buildings. The wells were drilled almost 100 years ago. We were drinking that water every day from a 100-year-old well. I'm not for sure about that. So what needed to happen is we needed a longer-term agreement. Where do you see this? There it is. We needed a longer-term 20-year agreement. The university got to the point where they were willing, mostly because of Michael Dillon chatting up and becoming a buddy of the guy by the name of Bill Nye, who at the time happened to be the University of Wyoming's Vice President for Administration and Finance, I think was his title. And he came up for a visit, loved it up here so much, was so enthused about it, that he got the university trustees to come up here 1 and 2 and 3 at a time and convince them to commit funding on a government property facility to spend a lot of money to fix these very, very old problems. So we need a longer term 20-year agreement to fix the water and wastewater. The seawall was broken down, and probably some sort of future housing, what do you call it, Michael? A residence facility for expanded capabilities in housing of people at the site. So we needed those. And they were planned for since the early 2000s by Hank, also working with the university engineers and the Park Service to agree on what needed to be done. And they developed a site development plan. And the Park Service had to do an environmental impact assessment on that. They produced an environmental assessment in 2013, and that was approved for on the finding of no significant impact. So that was approved to build out these water, wastewater, and other facilities. So the general agreement between the university and Grand Teton was negotiated for a couple of years and signed in 2018. And the trustees then, the 20 years third cooperative agreement, agreed to spend millions of dollars. And those millions of dollars have been, the spending of it was facilitated by, of all things, the COVID shutdown. To 2020 and 2021, with this new money approved by the trustees, encouraged by Bill Bond, the funding was available when the place was shut down to do things like tear the place up, put in a new sewer system and waste treatment, to put in new wells and new well water distribution, build the seawall, and plan for other things, including all kinds of things that I'll talk about in a minute. So the COVID shut down in 20 and 21, and then a construction continuation was shut down in 22. And now we're in 2023, so we're the fourth year back after this 3-year shutdown. But during the shutdown, Harlow and his colleagues and University of Wyoming operations supervised and oversaw millions of dollars on this facility. So they started with the water and wastewater. And that's all done. You can see the manholes going down the hill. Those were right on the road. Those were there till 2 years ago. And then, even before the new cooperative agreement was signed, a year before, we had what we call Matt Armageddon. There was a decision because of bad issues in this building and some of the other buildings to build a new roof and a big bad abatement on this building. And believe it or not, this is the accumulated bad guano from 1937 when the building was built, probably 2017. How many years is that? Bad guano accumulation. So this is one of the get bats out guys shoveling it out, cleaning it out. So and that was right here in these stretches of roof, right here. And we would find bat right here on the floor in the bathroom almost every day. So a big issue was to tear off the old roof, clean up the bat residue, abate by putting in things like hardware cloth in areas where bat would get in, and moving on to put a new roof on. In addition to this bat abatement and new roof, I mean, they've done bat mitigation as part of this cooperative agreement, as part of the university funding, bat mitigation for all basically most of the AM2 buildings. A new well and water distribution, new wastewater sewer system with septic tank, new septic tanks and leach field, a new seawall with dock repairs at the boathouse, restoration of the exterior logs, which is going on right now in a lot of the buildings, and interior repairs on many, including this floor. Those of you who've been coming here for years remember this used to be a nickel dime carpet in here, now it's refinished. They're going to be in the next week or two removing the Boise Cascade, the building which is totally out of place in historic district. So Charlie, sometime in the next few weeks, probably, the beginning and remove it. And then planning to fund and build a new housing facility outside of the historic district, probably up in the woods, above the new well site. And then enhanced internet Wi-Fi capabilities. A cleaning contract for routine cleaning so that the staff can work on research instead of cleaning toilets. Increased budget to add more staffing, including our new station manager, Hillary, who's in the back. So a lot, this cost, you can imagine, millions of dollars. Nobody will tell us how many, but it's more than 5, probably more, $8 million just spent the last 3 years to make this a better place for the future. So that's important. And next, it was Michael Dillon joining me on the dock for this memorial picture. Michael is now going to join us and tell us what's next. What's the future look like?
Thanks. Yeah, and that would be very quick. I have no slides. And so what I want to just tell you is, like all things, as we grow, we sort of evolve. We can come up with new ways to do things, how to do even better, build on the foundation that they've developed. And so I'm going to break it down into 6 words. So the first thing that we're really concerned with is inspiring discoveries. And that's a lot of the research that they talked about. How do we discover new things out here? How do we inspire that as a community? The next thing we want to do is elevate experience. So to me, that relates to the Baker Shevardnadze Summit. The fact that you guys are here, you can only come every week, right? And the last thing with that is connecting communities. Okay, so when we say communities, we mean all of you. We mean your friends in the area. How many people are from Jackson or the surrounding area? How many people are just showed up? The first time you've ever been here? Excellent. Yeah. How many people here are scientists? Everybody should be raising their hands. So we really deeply believe that. So a lot of the stuff that we're working on now and that we are working on in this Cardiff partnership is about how we recognize very, in the forefront of what we do, how do we recognize that our communities need to come together to do the next work? Okay, so that includes the Park Service, the Forest Service, the researchers who stay here and do work, and all of you who engage in that. And so keep posted, please join the mailing list, get your friends to join the mailing list, because there's a lot of really fun other opportunities to engage in this place coming up. We want you on the list so you're aware of them, okay? And I would like to just quickly give a round of applause to the UW trustees for investing in this place so we get to the place that we can do these things. Yeah, and if you need to go, please do not worry about it. Get up and go. If you'd like to stay and ask questions, great.
Provide housing for the bats.
We're trying to solve that problem. Michael, do you want to answer it? Maybe.
Yeah, so they've actually, we have this boat barn up in the back where maybe some of you might have parked near. And they've just, of their own accord, decided that's a really nice place to be. So if you walk within about 10 or 15 feet of that, you will hear them in there. We don't have any people in there. They're just vehicles and things, boats. And so we think, hey, it's kind of pre-built bat house right there. So they have somewhere to go. It will be, if you come in 10 more years, we will still be dealing with bats. This is not something that we are ever going to be finished with. But yes, it's a constant struggle to try to keep them down. Yeah.
I just got a comment. It was that this is Chuck Peters. We have been worried about going fishing wildlife service. Go up there and see a spot from us. And we got park service tickets, one money, the fund multiple students. That really doesn't. So I really appreciate it.
You should talk to Hillary. Hillary is an amphibian. Okay, good. That's awesome. Other questions?
What's the goal? Like I was wondering, the Park Service mission is. Is there a certain point in time when the clock stops? You don't want anything to change here? No naturalized species, no invaders coming in? What is the goal?
But you know, the clock never stops. Everything is changing, everything is evolving. One of the things about it, when you, national park, and think, oh, man, it's just underserved. But we're causing so many perturbations, so many changes that you have to manage. Thing is, when you're doing management, you're making a decision, it has to be a data-oriented decision. So you're not just doing it willy-nilly. It's never going to stop. Just like the bats are always going to come back. So it's to understand this ecosystem just one more notch at a time. Things like climate change. You have to understand this. Not going to change it on our lifetime right here in this spot, but we're going to certainly know how to adjust to it and have a water plan when we have drought and kind of the priorities on what's most important at the time.
And just to add to that, I mean, I think one of the core roles that we're trying to play now through our interactions with the park, a big question the park has is exactly what you're getting at. What is happening 20 years from now? And how do we now get the data we need to be able to adjust to what that looks like? Not just in the context of climate change, but invasive species, park management. How many more tourists are we going to have 20 years from now? That all links together, right? So what we have to do as a unit is bring social scientists who study visitor use patterns together with climate change scientists, together with other biologists to basically provide the park a better picture of what this looks like in 20 years and how they can prepare for it. Because that's the question coming down from Washington. What are you going to do with your park so that we can meet that obligation we have as a park service down the road? Yeah.
What have you done on Polecat Creek and the invasive zebra snake? Minimize those.
I haven't been involved in that. Do you guys know any?
You can't get rid of them. I mean, there are just hundreds and hundreds of thousands. They're little guys, you know, they kind of pull that plant on characters together. So digestive juices just can't break it down. So fish can't eat, they just defecate them down. But what we can hope is just to monitor